going to cover, there'll be at least one question. It says brain, brainstem, and cranial nerve. So it covers that, obviously. But included in the brain will be at least one question on the ventricular spaces. So choroid plexus, lateral ventricle, third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct, that kind of thing. The next 4 questions will be, say, central sulcus or corpus callosum, thalamus, parts of the brainstem, superior colliculus, all right, and then 1 question on the cranial nerve. There may or may not be a sheep brain image, okay? Cranial nerve may be on the sheep brain, or say, the thalamus on the sheep brain or something like that. But those will be the component parts of it. And obviously our lab exam is 2 weeks from today. So it's on a Wednesday instead of a Monday. And I already warned you that we don't have a 1 week from today. I'm sorry, I just said 2. 1 week from today. It's been 2 weeks since we had class. Thank you. No, 1 week from today. So when we do the eye and the ear on Monday, you won't have a weekend like we normally do for the new material. Okay, so I warned you about that before spring break. Kind of look at your days of study time. If you look in your lab manual, we're not doing the eye dissection, we're doing the brain dissection. And then the eye and the ear material and endocrine. So I will not be lecturing on endocrine, but we do have some models to look at. We'll see a couple of endocrine glands today. And then remember I said the lecture material would come from your lab manual. So on page 142 to 143. This written material is where the lecture content on the lecture exam will come from endocrine system. So about 5 questions or so from those 2 pages. On the lecture exam. And there'll probably be about 3 questions on endocrine system on the lab exam. But we'll have time in lab to look at that. But I won't be lecturing on endocrine. Okay, so this is where that material comes from. All right, so let's do the cranial nerves. And that starts on page 122, 123. There is a chart on page 124, 125, similar to the one I gave you. It does talk about whether the cranial nerve is associated with what, midbrain, pons, or medulla. I will not be testing you on that part. So whether it's the pons or medulla or midbrain, that part you don't need to memorize. But the skull, the foramina of the skull, you do need to know. And you know most of that already. All right? So, olfactory nerve. What foramina of the skull would that be associated with? Thinking back to our skull, here's the olfactory bulb. Okay, on the inferior aspect of the brain. And this is a good model right here because it looks down inside the skull and shows the cranial nerves as they're passing through the dura mater. So the olfactory nerve passes through what openings? It lies right medial to the eyeballs. Olfactory foramina of the cribriform plate. Okay? Optic nerve is going to pass through the optic canal or optic foramen. The other 3, the 3 nerves that go to the eyeball muscles, again, that we'll review on Monday, trochlear, ocular motor, and abducens, along with the sensory of trigeminal from the forehead and eye, all go through the superior orbital fissure. The other 2 branches of trigeminal, from the nose and upper jaw, foramen rotundum, and the 3rd branch from the lower jaw and sensory from the mouth and teeth and the chewing muscles go through foramen ovale. All right. Abducens with superior orbital fissure being the eyeball muscle, and cranial, vestibulocochlear, and facial. Vestibulocochlear has to do with hearing. So what 2 openings did we have in the skull that had the word acoustic or auditory? Internal and external. All right, so if you look on the inside of the skull, we have both 7 and 8 passing through the internal acoustic or auditory meatus. I wouldn't ask you to identify them separately, but I might say identify a nerve that passes through this opening. Vestibulocochlear or facial. All right? From the outside, facial goes to the facial muscles through stylomastoid foramen. Okay? The only ones that I haven't really covered in the skull lecture were what pass through the jugular foramen, 9, 10, and 11. All right? So glossopharyngeal, vagus, and accessory pass through the jugular foramen. So 9, 10, and 11 are jugular. And hypoglossal, you know that one already? Hypoglossal canal. Okay? All right, so if we look at the cranial nerves on the inferior aspect of the brain, and this is page 122, 123, here would be cranial nerve 1. Now, let me back up a bit. Remember, the cranial nerves are identified by Roman numerals. It's up to you whether you want to learn the numbers first and just identify them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then go back and learn on Old Olympus Towering Top or to touch and feel, you know, that one that I'm not going to say on tape. However, on the lab exam, cranial nerve numbers are not acceptable because many of our models have those numbers painted on them. So I need the name. So saying, you know, this is cranial nerve 7 won't give you any credit. You have to say facial nerve. In fact, I would leave the number off entirely because if you put facial nerve, cranial nerve 9, that's one correct answer and one wrong answer. That means both of them are wrong. Okay? So just name the nerve. On the lecture exam, I will give you both. So if I say, which of the following provides taste sensations for sweet, salty, sour, I will have oculomotor nerve, parentheses, C in 3. Facial nerve, parentheses, C in 7. Okay, so I will give you both on the lecture exam. So in essence, again, you can learn it as olfactory, optic, ocular motor, or you can just learn the numbers and then bring back the names. It's up to you entirely on how you do that. All right. So olfactory nerve has the bulb right here that lies over the cribriform plate. And we have the olfactory tract, or you can just call that olfactory nerve. Cranial nerve 1 is letter A. And that's a purely sensory, all right, for smell. Then we have the optic nerve. Here it's been cut. So on this view, optic nerve is cut. And then we have the optic chiasma and the optic tract going back to the thalamus. So optic nerve 2 is letter D, cranial nerve 2. Again, for sight, purely sensory. Then we move back to the midbrain. So here are the cerebral peduncles. This is a ventral view, remember? And coming between the two cerebral peduncles, we have cranial nerve 3, the ocular motor nerve. And that would be letter B. Ocular motor is motor to 4 of our eyeball muscles. And we'll talk about this on Monday. Eyeball muscles, you know, make your eye look up or down or sideways. It also is autonomic motor, because when you look at something up close, just check it out with a friend, have them read something up close after looking far away, and the pupil will constrict to help better focus. And you can't see it, but the lens will round up for short distance focus. That smooth muscle is innervated by ocular motor. Remember, half of our cranial nerves have something to do with the eye. And then lateral, so here's the ocular motor nerve. If we look lateral, we'll have the trochlear nerve, cranial nerve 4, traveling around the outside. So ocular motor and trochlear wrap around each cerebral peduncle. Ocular motor from the medial aspect, trochlear from the lateral. That's letter C on your diagram. Do you guys remember what trochlear refers to? We have the trochlear process as a condyle on the humerus, and it refers to pulley. So as we'll see on Monday, the muscle that the trochlear nerve innervates passes through a pulley before it actually attaches to the eyeball. And so that's why it's called the trochlear nerve, because that muscle is associated with the pulley. Then we come back to the midline down here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, we stay here for the trigeminal nerve. Okay, trigeminal is primarily sensory from the face. Remember the 3 branches? But it also has a motor branch for chewing muscles. It's the fattest of all of our cranial nerves. Here on the side of the pons. And that is letter E. So you can see it here. Trigeminal nerve. You can, and here as well. This would be trochlear coming from the side. Actually, yeah, that would be the trochlear nerve. All right? So we have 2, 3, 4 on the side, 5, and then we come back to the midline. So this is the pons, the basal pons, and here's our medulla. So on the midline, we have the abducens nerve, cranial nerve 6, and that is letter F. What does abduct mean? When we talked about joint function, moving away from the midline. All right. So if your eyeball looks to the outside, you're abducting your eyeball. Abducens nerve innervates the muscle that turns the eyeball outward. Okay, now I can't do that the same with both eyes. I can look in the middle with both eyes, but I can't turn both eyes, diverge both of them together. But the abducens nerve is going to innervate the lateral muscle that abducts the eyeball. So again, that helps you remember what it does. So those are 5 nerves that go to the eyeball. Optic, ocular motor, trochlear, trigeminal. Why is trigeminal an eyeball muscle? Sensory. If I scrape my cornea, or I, forget to neutralize my contact solution, if it has to be neutralized and burn it, trigeminal nerve. Okay. 6, the 5th cranial nerve, the cranial nerve 6, the 5th of the ones that go to the eyeball, moves the eyeball muscle. And then facial is 7. That's going to do a lot. What does facial nerve have to do with the eyeball? It's the 6th cranial nerve that goes to the eyeball. It's cranial nerve 7, but the 6th of the cranial nerves that go to the eyeball. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 all have something to do with the eyeball. Facial nerve does the tears, the lacrimal gland. Okay. It is also motor to the facial muscles. It's sensory for taste, and it's motor to some of our salivary glands. Now, before I go on that some say Mary Money, sensory, motor, but my brother says, and B is both, on that chart that's in your lecture notes. B is both motor and sensory. Okay? Abducens I have down as a motor. Some say Mary Money. So abducens, trochlear nerves are purely motor. Now, it's not contradicting what your lab manual says. All pure motor ones, it's understood, have sensory proprioception. All right, so hypoglossal is a purely motor nerve, but if I move my tongue around, I stick it out, I know where my tongue is. All right, so I don't have that as both, but it's understood that anything that's motor is going to have proprioception sensory component to it. All right, so 6, 7, and 8, as we go from medial to lateral. 7 is facial, and that's G, both sensory and motor. And then 8 is shown right here. If we look at the lateral view, 8 has 2 parts, vestibulo-cochlear. All right, vestibulo has to do with balance, cochlear with hearing. That's letter L. Now, if you're doing the on, Old Olympus, towering top, A, thin, and German, there's an A for vestibulocochlear. That's because its old name is auditory. So that's where the A comes from. Okay, if you're doing that on the Old Olympus, towering top version. So again, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then here are 9 and 10. They're almost like tufts of nerve rootlets. On some of the models, they run together. Okay. 9 is glossopharyngeal. That's letter H. Glosso refers to tongue. So the function that glossopharyngeal has to do with the tongue is taste. The bitter taste from the tongue. I don't know how much champagne you swallowed over spring break, but coffee maybe, you're more used to having the bitter aftertaste. The pharyngeal part is swallowing. Okay? And glossopharyngeal is also autonomic for our major salivary glands. So if you smell cinnamon rolls baking, or you chew gum and you get a lot of saliva, that's coming from the salivary gland just in front of your ear. This one right here. So the watery saliva is glossopharyngeal nerve. Chin is the more inferior one right there, and that's vagus. Vagus means wanderer. It's the longest of the cranial nerves. So it's going to do the pharynx as well. It's going to do swallowing with glossopharyngeal. It's going to do skeletal motor to larynx. So when you speak, that's vagus. It's autonomic motor to smooth muscle of your airways, to the heart, to the smooth muscle of your stomach, small intestine, and even part of your large intestine. It goes all the way down to here. Okay? That's vagus. If you look on our torsos, this nerve that's on the esophagus is vagus nerve. All right?
So it's autonomic.
Autonomic motor and voluntary motor and taste. And then we come back to the midline. So here would be 9 and 10. Well, 11 down here is kind of hard to see. And that's spinal accessory or just accessory. Some hops, so Fenninger reviewed some hops, the S in there comes from spinal accessory, or you can just call it accessory. It's really a spinal nerve that comes off the cervical spinal cord, goes up through foramen magnum, and then comes out the jugular foramen. So it's called a cranial nerve because it comes out an opening in the skull. On this model here, this long part right here is spinal accessory. Okay. The best place to see spinal accessory, and please take the time to look at it, is on this model here of the back. You actually can see almost all of the cranial nerves here. But running right here, you can see it on this side, but it's covered up by the dorsal rootlets. Here, going up and out, right there, is spinal accessory. Okay, so it shows a really good view of it coming off the spinal cord. And that's another motor one, to the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. And then finally we come back to the area between the olive and the pyramids, and we have hypoglossal. Right here. Okay, so again, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So you can learn it by number, go back and learn what the numbers stand for, or you can just learn the name straight off the, as you're looking at the model. So, vagus would be K, glossopharyngeal is H, vagus K, accessory J, and hypoglossal I. Did I give you facial? Okay, the cervical here is L. So why don't you take about 20 minutes or so to study the models, and refamiliarize yourself with the structures of the brainstem. And then in about 20 minutes, I'll have you clear the table and we'll do the sheet brain dissection. Okay?